Okay, I think we are in week 7 of quarantine, so we are moving on to finish our pre-Columbia unit this week. And the group I wanted to talk about next was we talked about the Mayan last week, and then you started working on your Aztec worksheet. And so this is going to be the Aztecs, and they were actually founded. Most of you probably already know that they were located around Mexico, Mexico City, and that surrounding area. Their territory expanded fairly far north and fairly far south, but not so much into the Mayan territory. So they weren't in Central America quite as much. They were incredibly powerful, but this group, the Aztecs, they believe were only around for a couple hundred years, a little over 200 years. There are some estimates. So the idea is that the Aztecs came in and took over after one other tribe was already kind of on its way out, and they established their own empire. The Aztec are known for having these huge populations. Like I said, they're famous. They believe there were about 100,000 people that lived within Tenochtitlan, which is actually present day Mexico City, and that is more than any European city had at that time period. So, right before Christopher Columbus came in 1492, about 50 to 100 years before, this was kind of the golden age of the Aztec. And once Christopher Columbus comes in 1492, then you have the conquistadors who are going to come in and they are going to take over from the ruler Montezuma, which you probably have heard of. So Tenochtitlan is present day Mexico City. Mexico City was literally built on top of a lake, and they started just using these very strong trees, and they would pile them into or pound them down into the lake floor, and then they would build up on top of that. And it was also, there was a lot of series of canals, and I feel like when you go to Mexico City today, at least the parts that I've seen, I haven't really seen those canals. But that's also why, if you hear about earthquakes around Mexico, why it's more dangerous, because they are literally on liquid. The city is built on liquids. So there were floating gardens. There are other places in the world today that you can find floating gardens, but they had floating gardens. They had a highly developed medical system. They did reuse human sacrifice. Human sacrifice was typically prisoners. Occasionally, it would be somebody who was kind of groomed to be this amazing sacrifice to the gods, but a lot of them are just going to be people who are captured as prisoners of war. And there is absolutely evidence of this. If you ever go to Mexico City and take a tour of some of the ruins, you will see, like, they're like, and here are all the buried bones from the last sacrifice. They were very big on everybody being trained for the military, and girls were also obviously working in home, but they would also be educated as well. On the right, you can see, top right, you can see I've already given you a gory picture of how they believe the human sacrifice took place, and it was oftentimes in order to appease the gods. If you're having a year of drought, then maybe you need to kill some people. If you're getting ready to go to war, maybe you need to ask for the war god's help. And so you offer this blood sacrifice. On the picture on the left of the map, that the green area is going to be pretty much the depth of the Aztec Empire. You can see that Tenochtitlan is there on the lake. That is where Mexico City is located today. But like I said, it doesn't really go super far into Central America. And now I'm going to jump actually back one here. Sorry about that. Talking about the Incan Empire. So just really briefly about the Incan Empire. Incan Empire. It is located along the Andes in what is considered, not considered, it is present day Peru, Chile, and Ecuador. And it goes obviously into Bolivia as well. The Incan Empire is built on from having tribe members all the way down by the ocean and all the way high up in altitudes. And actually, they practiced a lot of their trading was practiced between, if I grew something up at a very high altitude that could only be grown up there, I would then start trading down to the next level to get the goods that I needed there. They were incredibly efficient in the fact that they had a very vast road network that connected the entire population of the Incan Empire, which was unheard of. And they also had like a series of runners. They had people that would go door to door and take a census of each village. That means like how many people live here, how much do they own. So they wanted to know what each person had, so they could tax that person, and that person would then give to the empire. Well, you might be like, well, that's not very fun, but it is important because it shows that the government was thinking ahead. The government would actually have storehouses where they would collect corn. They would collect sheep, llamas, or not sheep, because that's actually New World, um, or Old World. They would collect llamas and things like that in order to hold on to them. In that case, if they ever had times of famine or they were caught up in war or something like that, they could still feed their people. So it was kind of a socialist, I guess you would say, empire in that way, if they tried to take care of their people. They also had what they call quipus, which were these like knotted strings that some people would wear on their waist, or sometimes they would wear on their necklace as a necklace, and it was seen as like a counting of the people. They actually used that knotted rope and how many knots there were in it to signify how many people lived in a certain village. Most of you probably are familiar or at least heard of Machu Picchu. The picture on the left is Machu Picchu, and you can still go there today. And I know they are somewhat limiting how many people go to Machu Picchu and actually impact that area, but it was this city that was found kind of pristine condition high up in the Andes Mountains. And people are just like, wow, how do you even get there? The picture on the right, you can actually see all of these lines are going to be the roads that they would take, obviously, or some of the routes that were established during the Incan Empire. The Incan Empire is also going to be known extensively for having a lot of silver and gold. However, yes, they used silver and gold for ornamentation. They used it for decoration. They used it for things like this. But it wasn't held as in high esteem as, of course, the Europeans are going to. So once the Europeans come to the New World and they interact with the Incan and they see this gold and they see this silver, all of a sudden, this is like the Europeans turn bloodthirsty because they want more and more and more and more. Because Europeans obviously hold gold and silver in high esteem. The reason we just talk about these pre-Columbian empires in the South is because, once again, we are often given the scenario, or we are often told the story of Native Americans were inferior. They didn't have the technology that the Europeans had, that they were not learned like the Europeans were, that they didn't have a writing. Not most, a lot of the Native American tribes in pre-Columbia era actually did have some type of writing system. They definitely had a way to communicate with one another, even if they didn't know the language. They had extensive trade networks. They had extensive hierarchy of like having priests and gods and kings and rulers all the way down to serfs. So like we always talking about that feudal pyramid, they have that. They have what quote unquote Europeans would consider to be civilized. But oftentimes we are told that, oh, because they're not wearing as many clothes, because they don't know what the Bible is, that they're inferior. And it's just so not true. In many ways, they're more advanced than the Europeans. And in many ways, the Native Americans look at the Europeans and like, oh, these guys are hairy and smelly and they're rough and we don't like them. So they both see each other as kind of the other. And this goes back to the Aztec here. I'm going to stop it here because I'm not really going to go into the North American tribes right now, though I do find Native American tribes in North America where we live incredibly fascinating. But that is it. It was a quick one. So once again, hope you guys have a great week this week.